Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Always fun to dig into a new topic.
Well, today we're tackling something I think a lot of our listeners are interested in, the 1947 partition of India and Pakistan.
Yeah, it's one of those historical events with huge ripple effects that we still feel today.
Absolutely, and to help us unpack all of it, we're going to be looking at this really interesting YouTube video from History Matters.
Yeah, I've seen that one. It's called Why Was India Partitioned? Right.
That's the one, a short animated documentary.
Right.
Which is perfect for what we like to do, because we're not just looking at the what happened, but also the WHY and the head OB.
The WHY is key here because, like you said, the consequences of this event were so significant.
Right. So let's dive in and see if we can uncover some of those aha moments together for everyone listening.
Sounds good to me.
So the video starts off by setting the stage. It's post-World War II, and Britain's grip on India is loosening.
Makes sense. The war really shook up the global power dynamics. Exactly. Even Winston Churchill, who was a staunch supporter of keeping India under British control, he couldn't hold back the tide after he lost the election.
Yeah, the world was changing, and the old colonial systems were starting to crumble.
It was a new reality, and Britain had to adapt, even if they weren't too happy about it.
Adapting to losing that much power is never easy.
Okay, so here's something that surprised me in the video, and it kind of highlights how much more was going on than just India versus Britain Ceylon, which we know today as Sri Lanka. It wasn't actually part of British India.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And Burma, which had been part of British India at one point, was being administered separately by this time.
And even within India itself, not all of it was directly under British rule.
Exactly. Some areas like Hyderabad were governed by Indian princes. It just makes you realize how much more complex the situation on the ground was.
Right. It wasn't just one big unified India under British control.
So you can see why simplifying this whole region as just India, ignoring the unique cultures, the languages, the religions, it's a recipe for problems.
Oh, absolutely. The British oversimplification played a huge role in fueling the tensions that led to partition.
Yeah, the video really makes that point. And if
Yeah.
you think about the Cold War that was starting to heat up,
Right. A unified and stable India would have been a huge asset to the West.
strategically speaking, keeping India together made a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
But then the video introduces this key figure, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the Muslim League. And he becomes a major advocate for partition.
Yeah, his argument was all about protecting the Muslim minority in a newly independent India that was going to be predominantly Hindu.
Right, he was worried about their rights, their cultural identity. He felt all of that would be threatened.
So he pushed for a separate Muslim state.
And that's how we get Pakistan.
The name itself is fascinating.
It's an acronym. You ready for this?
Hit me with it.
Punjab, Afghania, Kashmir, Indus, and Sindh.
Wow. And those were all Muslim majority regions. Right?
Exactly. And the Akstan at the end just means land in Persian.
Pretty clever way to bring it all together.
Right. So Jinnah was a powerful leader. His message really resonated with a lot of Muslims who felt like they weren't being heard within the Indian National Congress.
They felt increasingly marginalized.
Exactly. And that contributed to the growing divide.
You can see how his advocacy really shaped the course of events.
Absolutely. So tensions are rising, violence breaks out, and the Indian National Congress refuses to even negotiate with the Muslim League.
At this point, it seems like the British are just ready to wash their hands of the whole thing.
Like, we made this mess, you guys figure it out.
Yeah, their desire to just get out of there as quickly as possible, combined with all the violence that was already happening, it really set the stage for a rushed and messy partition.
Which is one of the biggest tragedies of this whole event.
Absolutely.
So now you've got all this tension simmering, and the responsibility of actually dividing this incredibly diverse region falls to Lord Mountbatten, the last British Viceroy of India.
Talk about a tough job.
The video really highlights how controversial drawing those borders was.
I can only imagine Mountbatten was under immense pressure to get it done, and to get it done quickly.
Right, not exactly a recipe for thoughtful decision-making.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it. Trying to redraw the map of a whole subcontinent in just a matter of weeks, with all its complexities.
And to make things even more complicated, Indian states were given three options.
Three options.
Join India, join Pakistan, or go it alone, become independent.
Wow, so each state had to make this huge decision.
Right, and while most chose to join either India or Pakistan, there were some like Hyderabad and Kashmir that wanted independence.
Which created even more tension, right?
Exactly, and as we'll see, it really set the stage for future conflict.
It's like trying to solve one problem just creates a whole bunch of new ones.
Exactly. It's a chain reaction with consequences that are still being felt today. And then there's the human side of this whole partition.
Right, millions of people, Hindus and Muslims, being uprooted from their homes.
Forced to move to the right side of the new border.
A mass migration unlike anything the world had ever seen.
And of course, the British government promised it would all be peaceful and orderly.
I'm sure they did.
But as the video points out, that promise was broken.
It's heartbreaking to think about all the families torn apart, all the violence and the sense of loss that must have just permeated everything.
Yeah, the video doesn't shy away from painting a pretty grim picture.
It really highlights the human cost of this political decision.
And it makes you wonder, for all those people who had to uproot their entire lives, did the idea of India or Pakistan even mean the same thing to them as it did to the politicians drawing lines on a map?
That's a really interesting question.
Right, like for everyday people, their sense of belonging might have been rooted in their village, their community, their local traditions.
And suddenly they're being thrust into this larger national identity.
It must have been so disorienting.
Traumatic, even.
It's easy to get caught up in the big political picture,
Absolutely.
but the video does a good job of bringing it back to the human level.
Reminding us that history isn't just about dates and events, it's about people's lives,
And the partition left scars that run deep,
both physically and emotionally.
something that continues to shape the identities and experiences of people in India, Pakistan, and the diaspora to this day.
Absolutely.
So the video focuses on the lead up to the partition, but I'm curious what happened afterward. How did this event impact the relationship between India and Pakistan going forward?
Oh, that's a complex question.
I bet it is.
I mean, partition didn't magically erase the tensions that had been building up.
If anything, it probably made them worse.
Definitely the rushed nature of the process, the violence that accompanied it, and those lingering disputes over territories like Hyderabad and Kashmir,
All of that created a legacy of mistrust and hostility.
which unfortunately persists to this day.
We talked about Hyderabad and Kashmir earlier, but those cases really highlight how even within the framework of partition, there were all these other power struggles happening.
Yeah, it's like the partition created this ripple effect,
Yeah.
setting off all these chain reactions of conflict and instability.
So it's not just one event, it's this whole cascade of consequences.
And they're still playing out.
Like take Hyderabad, for example, a wealthy princely state with a Muslim ruler, but a mostly Hindu population.
Right.
The ruler wanted independence, but India ended up annexing it by force.
Yeah. And then there's Kashmir, a region that's been contested since the very beginning.
A constant source of tension between India and Pakistan.
The Hindu ruler opted to join India, but Pakistan disputed that decision, and it led to a war that split the region.
And that conflict continues to cast a shadow over the relationship between the two countries.
Absolutely.
It's incredible how this one event, the partition, continues to shape the geopolitical landscape even today.
It's a testament to the power of history.
The partition isn't just a story from the past,
It's a story that's still being written,
with implications that extend far beyond just India and Pakistan.
affecting the whole region and really the entire world.
The video really made me think about the Cold War context and how global politics played a role in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. The Cold War was this giant chessboard, and India became a pawn.
In a game between superpowers,
The British, wanting to secure allies for the West, they saw a unified India as a valuable asset.
right,
But the internal dynamics in India, the rise of nationalism, the growing divide between Hindus and Muslims, it all made that vision increasingly difficult to achieve.
so the partition wasn't just a result of internal pressures.
It was also a product of external forces.
this confluence of historical events that all came together at a very specific moment in time.
It really is fascinating how all these different threads intertwine.
Like a perfect storm.
Yeah, and it reminds us that history is rarely simple or straightforward.
It's not black and white.
There's so many layers. Political ambitions, religious beliefs, cultural identities, global power dynamics.
To really understand an event like the partition, you have to pull back those layers and see how everything connects.
Exactly.
So after diving into all of this, what stands out to you as the most crucial takeaway for our listener?
I think the most important thing to remember is nuance.
Nuance.
The partition of India and Pakistan is not a simple story with
Yeah.
clear heroes and villains.
Right.
It's a story full of complexities, contradictions, unintended consequences.
It's a story that challenges us to think critically about history.
To question our assumptions and to acknowledge the human cost of political decisions.
It's so easy to get caught up in those grand narratives, but ultimately it's the individual stories, the experiences of those who lived through this tumultuous period that really matter.
They illuminate the true impact and legacy of the partition.
And that leads to a crucial question. Could it have been different? Could the violence, the displacement, the enduring animosity have been avoided if different choices had been made? It's a question that really makes you think, like if they had just done this one thing differently, or if that hadn't happened, could they have avoided all the pain and suffering?
It's easy to get caught up in those what-ifs,
Yeah.
but it also shows us that history is all about choices.
And every choice has consequences.
Right, those ripple effects that can last for generations.
What if the British had taken a more gradual approach to granting independence?
Or what if there had been more effort to find common ground between Hindus and Muslims?
Like really trying to understand and address their fears and anxieties?
Instead of just focusing on dividing them.
Right, building a sense of shared national identity that could have brought everyone together.
It's hard not to wonder about those possibilities.
Yeah.
But then again, history is rarely simple.
There were so many factors at play, so many competing interests.
And that's why it's so important to approach history with humility.
Humility.
We can analyze the past, we can try to make sense of the decisions people made, but we can never fully grasp what it was actually like to live through those times.
We can't step into their shoes.
Exactly. And that should make us cautious about making judgments or thinking we have all the answers.
It's like we've been saying this whole time, there are so many layers to this story.
It's not just about politics, it's about people.
It's about culture and identity and the long-term consequences that we're still grappling with today.
This video was a great overview, but it really just scratched the surface.
It makes you want to learn more.
Absolutely, and if you're listening and want to dig deeper, I think the next step would be to explore those personal stories we talked about.
The voices of those who lived through the partition.
Their firsthand accounts of what it was like to be uprooted from their homes, to lose everything, to face so much uncertainty.
Those stories can really bring history to life.
They make it real, they make it personal.
Sometimes history can feel distant and abstract.
But then you read a firsthand account or a novel set during that time, and it suddenly becomes so vivid, so immediate.
You can almost feel what they felt.
And that's what makes history so captivating. It's not just facts and dates, it's about human experiences.
The joys and sorrows, the triumphs and tragedies.
By exploring those stories, we can gain a much deeper understanding, not just of the past, but of ourselves and the world we live in.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, what would you say is the biggest lesson we can learn from the partition of India and Pakistan?
I think the most important takeaway is the importance of empathy, understanding, and communication.
Especially today.
The partition was a result of division, a failure to bridge the gap between communities.
It's a warning sign about the dangers of intolerance and prejudice.
And the dehumanization of those who are different from us.
It's a message that's still relevant today in a world that often feels so divided.
It's easy to get caught up in our own perspectives, our own beliefs.
But we have to remember that there are always multiple sides to every story.
To truly understand something as complex as the partition, we need to be open to different viewpoints.
And willing to engage in meaningful dialogue, even with those who see the world differently than we do.
It's the only way to learn and grow.
Well said. So I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the partition of India and Pakistan.
It's been a fascinating journey.
We hope you've gained some new insights into this pivotal moment in history.
A moment that continues to shape our world today.
And remember, history isn't just about the past.
It's about understanding the present and shaping the future.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those conversations going.
We'll see y'all soon for another deep dive.